Thank you all for coming, and so want to just do a really brief introduction to the League of Women Voters. I think most of you are pretty familiar with it, and Bonnie and I are both longtime members. And the League is a grassroots and nonpartisan organization of women and men. And nonpartisan means that we never support or oppose parties or candidates. We have two different branches. In voter service and education, we work to make sure that there's complete information on all sides of an issue. We also have an action and advocacy branch where we do take positions and may advocate on issues, so for legislation or ballot measures or against them. And we keep these two roles as separate as we can. And today we are representing the voter education branch. So we're just going to talk about, try to do this from a pretty neutral point of view. And we ask you all to consider joining the League. For questions, I can't see people, so I'm going to say, at the end of each ballot measure, maybe we'll just stop and have a bit of discussion. People will have to just speak up because I can't see. So real quickly want to talk a little bit about evaluating ballot measures. You need to talk about you need to understand what it does and why it came to about, how much it costs, and how that cost will be paid for. Is it well written, or is it likely to cause more problems than it actually solves? Follow the money, which really is, who's paying for it, who's really behind it, and who's against it. Where's the money coming from? And then you can also look at who's supporting and opposing, and who for people or organizations that you respect. A reminder that voting is not a test. It's okay to leave blanks. If you don't understand something or you don't feel like you know enough, that's fine. So you can only vote on the things that are clear and things that are important to you.
Helen, I'm going to just step in for a minute, because
Please.
I can watch. So if people want to put questions in the chat, I can watch that for this portion of the presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Bonnie. And there are, on the ballot in November, there's going to be 7 California issues, 10 for the city of Oakland, and 1 for Alameda County. And we're going to go through them in order, doing the California ones first. And so if there are people who don't live in Oakland, you're welcome then to leave at that point. And I'm going to do the California measures, and then Bonnie's going to do the city and county ones. So for the California measures, just a real quick reminder that the legislature can put things on the ballot. Ballot propositions make new laws, and they change existing laws or change the Constitution. And a proposition passes and becomes law if it receives 50% plus 1 votes, so more than 50% of the vote. And there's no supermajority ever required in California. They can get on the ballot in 2 different ways. The legislature can put things on the ballot, and Prop 1 is one that was placed on the ballot that way. Initiatives are changes proposed by citizens who collect enough signatures to get on the ballot, and we have 5 of those. And then there's also a thing called a referendum, and a referendum is a law that is passed by the legislature, and then people collect signatures to say, we want to make sure that we want the people to vote on that before it actually gets enacted. So Prop 1, it has to do with reproductive freedom. I think we're all pretty aware that in last June, the Supreme Court ended the federal constitutional right to an abortion. And there's also concern that the right to contraception may be under a similar threat. Abortion is currently legal under California state law, and this proposition does not change that law. There's also a California Supreme Court case which holds that the state constitution's right to privacy extends to an individual's decision about whether or not to have an abortion. If it passes, Prop 1 would explicitly add the right to an abortion or contraception to the California Constitution. It would make it harder for a future state government to change the law to limit reproductive rights, or for a future California court to overturn existing case law. There's no budgetary effects estimated for Proposition 1. So who's spending for and against it? Who's for it and against it, and what kind of money is there? People who or organizations that signed the ballot measure are in the bold type. Everybody else are either donors or have endorsed it in some one way or another, or are against it in one way or another. There may be a delay in getting accurate data because the campaigns, as campaigns continue to report money, these numbers change. So reasons to support or oppose it. If you might support it because you want to have reproductive freedom named as a right in the California Constitution, and to keep reproductive medical decisions where they belong with individuals and their healthcare providers. People who oppose this say that women already have the right to choose under California law, and Prop 1 is not needed to protect women's health or their reproductive rights. You might also oppose it because you simply don't support reproductive freedom as a right. So what your vote would mean is, if you vote yes on this, the California Constitution would explicitly include the rights to reproductive freedom. And if you vote no, the California Constitution would not be changed. So do we have any questions on Prop 1? I'll go back to this one. Any questions?
See nothing in the
Okay.
chat.
Okay, well, I'm going to just keep going. Prop 26 and Prop 27 both are measures that would have more forms of gambling in California. I'll do them in order. Prop 26 would allow in-person roulette, dice, and sports betting in California. At present, California does not allow sports betting. It does not allow roulette or games with dice. California gambling is limited to the state lottery. We have card rooms, we have horse race betting, and we have the tribal casinos. That's where things are limited. And Native American tribes have agreements with the state to offer gambling, and each one of those agreements, it says what that tribe can offer on their lands. The Native American gambling helps raise money to lift the tribes out of poverty because it creates jobs and provides services like education and healthcare and housing. And it also brings additional revenue for the state and local governments. Prop 26 would allow additional gambling. It would allow in-person sports betting to those who are over 21 at racetracks and at tribal casinos, and would also allow additional gambling like roulette at tribal casinos. It would impose a 10% tax on the net revenue from that gambling, so they'd get to deduct their expenses, and would put that in a new fund. And then 70% of that money would go to the state general fund, and 15% would go to anti-gambling efforts, and 15% to the State Department of Justice. So the fiscal effects are that it would increase some state revenue, because we'd get, and the estimate is it would be tens of millions of dollars annually. And that is, even though there would be increased state costs to enforce and regulate the new law, there still would be an increased revenue to the state. So people who are for it here, you can see the signatories again are noted in bold. And there's a delay in getting accurate data about how much money is being spent for and against it, but you can see at least a general the general comparison about what's going on. And we list newspapers here when they have endorsed a yes or a no vote on it. So reasons you might want to vote for this would be that you think that additional revenue to help the Indian tribes provide these services to their members is a good deal. Or you think that the sports betting in person would provide safeguards against underage gambling. Reasons to oppose it are you don't want additional gambling that expands a monopoly of or only benefits tribal casinos. Or you'd say gambling is addictive, legalizing more types of gambling is bad for public health and safety. So what your vote would mean is yes, that you want more in-person gambling options, and no means that you would leave the rules about gambling would be limited to their current options in California. I'm just going to keep going, and Bonnie, I'm going to expect that you'll just speak up if we get some questions. Is that
Okay.
fair? Okay.
Mhm.
So Prop 27 is also about gambling, but in this one is about online sports betting. We did not allow any sports betting in the United States until 1933, when betting on horse racing became legal. And then in 2018, the US Supreme Court said states could legalize sports betting in general. Sports betting is currently not legal in California. Prop 27 would legalize online sports betting as well as some non-athletic events. It would like awards shows and current events. This could be offered by Indian tribes and gambling companies that contract with them. No betting would be allowed on youth sports or on elections. It would impose a one-time licensing fee, plus there would be renewal fees every 5 years. And there is this one also has a 10% tax on the net revenue from the betting. In this case, it would go to, it would be dedicated to homelessness and mental health and addiction programs, with 15% of it going to the tribes that are not involved in sports betting. So the fiscal effects would increase state revenues by hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And this is the 85% to homelessness, mental health, and gambling addiction, and 15% to the tribes not involved in sports betting. Organizations for and again, the bold type is who signed the ballot arguments. Yeah, same kinds of things as before. I'll leave it just for a minute so you can see. Reasons you might want to support this is that it would provide more money to support programs to alleviate homelessness, and it would be help with mental health issues and addiction. It may be more advantageous, to the smaller Indian tribes that don't own the big casinos. Reasons you might want to oppose it is that it benefits large gaming companies and blocks smaller operations. Eligible companies must be licensed in 10 states and pay $100 million to California for a license. And then online sports betting makes gambling even more accessible than it is now. So if you vote yes on this, you would allow online sports betting, and no, you would not allow online sports betting.
You might want to back up to the previous slide because Linda has a question about one of the people that are supporting or opposing it.
Okay.
So go back one slide.
One more. Okay. Yep.
There you go. Linda, do you want to ask your question directly?
Is that the CTA that's opposing it? California Teachers
Union. Yes.
Okay, so I wonder why. What could you imagine their logic is in opposing it? Curious.
I don't know. I will also note that the Democrats and Republicans are both against it, which is unusual to see.
And the city, it's just an interesting split of interests here. It's kind of curious.
Well, the mayors, this is money, will generate more money for to spend to help alleviate homelessness and mental health issues. And I think big city mayors are always looking for more money, would be my guess.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
There may be some clarification in the booklet from the Secretary of State. So you might look at that. It goes into greater detail, of course, than we are on these slides.
Yeah. Yeah. And, again, look at who's paying the money, where the money is coming from. That also helps some. Okay. So I'm going to go
I'd go to 28 now.
Yeah, I think we can move on to Prop 28. So Prop 28 has to do with money for arts and music in schools. Prop 98, which we passed in 1988, so way back when, the state that requires that the state spends a minimum amount of money on K-14 education, which is kindergarten through community college. And that minimum guarantee, it's about 40% of the state general fund goes to these educational things. And there's a calculation that's done every year. Given that there's still no guaranteed source of funding for arts and music education in the K-12 public schools, state law does require schools to provide arts and music instruction to all students in grades 1 through 6. And in order to graduate, high school students have to complete a year in one of 3 courses, which includes arts and music education. Beyond these requirements, there's other specifics about the amount of instruction or when courses are offered, and that's all determined by local governing boards. What Prop 28 would do is require that funding for arts and music education be at least 1% of the funding received by schools the prior year under Prop 98. So in addition to the money schools would get from Prop 98, they'd get an additional 1% that would be dedicated to arts and music. And so there'd be more money, and that money would be more for, so Prop 28 would also allocate more funding to schools that serve many low-income students. So it would be an increased amount for the high needs students. The fiscal effect, it would increase state expenses by about $1 billion a year, or it would allocate from the general fund another about $1 billion a year. So there'd be $1 billion a year that would not be available for other things that it's currently going to. The signatories for this, you can see the California Teachers Association, CTA, and the state PTA. And no one side, there were no arguments against it on the ballot. Nobody spent against it. The Mercury News did have an op-ed against it. That you can see that, more people are there's a lot more organization for it than against it at this point. Reasons to support it are that, arts and music education improve a student's personal and academic life. And only 1 in 5 schools currently have a dedicated teacher for arts programs. Reasons to oppose it is that it would limit the state funds available for other spending. So it would reduce by about $1 billion a year money that would be available for other spending. And setting aside funds for specific funds limits the flexibility to spend on whatever the legislature determines the highest needs are that year. So your yes vote would mean we'd have guaranteed funding for arts and music education in the K-12 public schools, and a no would mean there's no change in the current funding for schools. Okay, I'm going to move on to Prop 29. We have had, this is about kidney dialysis clinics, and you've seen this before. Everybody I think remembers that we had 2 propositions, one in 2018 and one in 2020, that were very similar to this. And they were supported by SEIU, which is a labor union that's attempting to unionize healthcare workers at dialysis clinics. The state's 2 largest dialysis businesses, which are DaVita and Fresenius Medical Care, operate about 3/4 of the dialysis clinics in California. There are current federal regulations on how the clinics operate, and that includes about doctors' visits and reporting infection rates. Prop 29 would impose some new requirements for the clinics. They would have to have at least 1 doctor, a nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant present during all treatment hours. They could use telehealth for up to 1 year, and then after that, they'd have to have somebody physically present. they have to report any dialysis related infections to the state every 3 months. And they have to disclose who owns the clinics to the patients. They need permission from the state before closing or reducing their services. And they couldn't refuse to treat patients based on how they're paying for their treatments. The fiscal effects of this one. The clinics would have to pay hundreds of $1,000s more because they have to pay salaries to staff. If the clinics close and patients have to go to more expensive facilities like emergency rooms, or if the clinics negotiate higher reimbursement rates, state and local governments might have to pay up to tens of millions of dollars of more annually because for Medi-Cal patients. The spending on this and who's for and against it. Again, the signatories are in bold type. For it is as I said, SEIU is the union that put this on the ballot. So, reasons you might want to support this is that clinics should have a healthcare provider available for all procedures. And you want to prevent financial discrimination based on the type of insurance, whether it's Medi-Cal, Medicare, or private insurance. Reasons you might want to impose this is that some dialysis clinics in the state may close because of increased costs. Dialysis clinics already currently must have an RN on site, and the proposition changes that to a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant, or a medical doctor. Dialysis is administered by specially trained technicians, and additional requirements could take healthcare providers away from hospitals and emergency rooms where they're needed more. A yes vote means we'd have more regulation on kidney dialysis clinics, and a no would keep the current regulations. Okay, I'm going to move on to Prop 30. Prop 30 is a tax on millionaires, and it would help strengthen the electric grid and provide for more zero emission vehicles or electric cars. California, we currently have a number of zero emission mandates that 35% of cars have to be zero emission vehicles by 2026 and 100% by 2035, which is not that long away. The state requires ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft to have 90% of their drivers driving zero-emission vehicles by 2030. Both federal and state government have committed to spending billions of dollars in tax credits and other efforts to speed up the adoption of zero-emission vehicles. California has budgeted between $6 and $10 billion over 6 years. Prop 30 would increase the income tax rate on high individual incomes to raise money, and that money would be spent 45%, so just under half would be to promote the purchase of zero emission vehicles through rebates and incentives. 35%, so just over a third, would increase the availability of electric charging stations. And then the balance, which is 20%, would help fund wildfire suppression and prevention. The fiscal effects would be, we'd increase the income tax rate by 1.75% on individual incomes above $2 million per year. The tax increases on the money earned over $2 million, not on the first $2 million. It would generate somewhere between 3.5 and $5 billion. So that would amount to about 2.8 to $4 billion annually in funding for zero emission vehicles, and $700 million to $1 billion annually for wildfire responses. There are, let's see, we don't see any of these in bold, so none of these are the groups or individuals who signed the arguments for and against, but you can see who's spending and who's endorsed for and against this one. So reasons you might want to support this are that greenhouse gas emissions from cars and other transportation are the largest contributors to climate change, and it would make zero emission vehicles more affordable. Reasons you might want to oppose this are that the state and federal governments are already spending billions of dollars to speed up the adoption of zero emission vehicles. High earners might actually leave the state because it will have the highest income tax rate in the United States. It would be 15.05% for incomes over $2 million. It would lock in money that is raised by the tax increase from use by any other need, such as school funding, and limit it to this one use.
So Linda Benson has a question, I
Okay.
think.
Yep. Hey, Linda.
And you're muted, Linda. So you want to unmute? Linda
Yeah,
Benson?
I was just wondering how the firefighters got in there, or how that's related. When you go back, thing where you talk about who was for and against, maybe.
The
No,
wildfire
just about
suppression.
the firefighters.
One more. Where the fire, the fiscal effects for and against.
Where was did I make that up?
No, I think they may have assigned it. And
So if you go back one more, I think it shows the reasons, the
no,
fiscal effect, that there will be
This-
some money, some rather large amount of money for
Oh,
wildfire.
yeah. Well,
yeah.
how did
Yeah.
that get in there?
I think it is something of an add-on, but also that wildfires are actually contributing to the emissions in California somewhat significantly, at least during the season. I think that is the idea.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay. Did we finish? We finished the arguments for and against? Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So a yes vote would have a new tax on income over $2 million, and it would be used to increase electric vehicle adoption and fight fires. And a no means we'd have no change to our current tax rate. Prop 31 is a referendum. And so we go through the history of this. In 2020, the legislature passed a law to ban the sale of, both from stores and vending machines, of flavored tobacco products. And flavors are things that are added like fruit and menthol and chocolate, and they can mask or sometimes enhance the flavor of the tobacco. The law was challenged. People gathered signatures, and so that law is now on hold. This proposition is a referendum on that law. So it says we, as the voters, have to decide whether or not the law that was passed by the legislature should go into effect. The fiscal effect is that if this law goes into effect, we would reduce state tobacco tax revenues, and that could be tens of millions of dollars to maybe $100 million annually. We don't see here's who's for and against. There's a lot more spending against this one. And we don't see who signed the ballot arguments on this one yet. Reasons to support it are that flavored tobacco products can lure middle and high school children into lifelong addiction to nicotine. Flavored tobacco products can make it harder to quit smoking, even though the tobacco use is linked to increased rates of heart disease, stroke, and cancer. Reasons you might want to oppose it is that it's already illegal to sell tobacco products to anyone under the age of 21. So this total prohibition is not necessary to keep tobacco from our youth. Criminalizing the sale of menthol cigarettes could impact minority communities more and may lead to more smuggling and crime. So a yes vote, this is really important to remember, because a referendum, people get confused by the wording. A yes vote means you want to allow the law to take effect and ban the sale of flavored tobacco products in California. A no means you do not want that law to take effect, so that we would continue to allow the sale of flavored tobacco products in California. That all makes sense to people?
Mhm.
I'm gonna stop sharing because it's time to go to the
I
Oakland
think I
measures.
was going to say, I think that there may be one more slide that gives us, well, maybe not. I
No.
forget when it is, but people might, if people want more information about the state measures, there are
Yeah.
places where you can go on the web. The League of Women Voters of California Education Fund has a website that is cavotes.org, I think. There's an
Yes.
S on the end, CA Votes.
Yep.
And on that page, you can actually find one page pros and cons of all of the state measures that you can either read online or you can print them out. And then there's also a publication that I think we're hoping to get some copies of for the church that's called the Easy Voter Guide. And it has very simple pros and cons of the state ballot measures. So,
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen and see if I can figure out what I want to do. I think it's this one. See what happens. Oh, come now, come. All right, so I'm going to talk about the Oakland ballot measures. And just as Helen explained how measures get on the ballot at the state level, there are several methods that can be used to put measures on the ballot locally. So the city council or the school district can actually place measures on the ballot, and 9 of the 10 that we're going to talk about are done that way. And then there's one initiative where signatures were gathered to put it on the ballot. And ballot measures can change the city charter, they can amend it, or they can result in new ordinances, which are the equivalent of laws in the city. They can be taxes, or they can be taxes. So you can raise taxes by selling bonds, which is debt that's approved by the voters and paid for by property tax, or you can actually institute a parcel tax, a fixed amount for a specific number of years that's paid for by the property tax. So let's just jump right in. Measure H was put on the ballot by the Oakland Unified School District. It is a parcel tax and it will require passage 2/3 vote in favor of this. So it's by way of some background. In 2014, Measure N was passed by voters, an annual parcel tax to allow high schools to develop pathways to careers such as business, education, and healthcare. It also paid for integrating high school academics, so classroom education, with career-based learning and real-world experiences. Measure N will expire in June of 2025. Measure N has provided a stable source of approximately 11.5 million annually that's dedicated funding to develop this program. The impact of the programs has been positive and significant, with double-digit improvement in graduation rates for African American and Latinx students. Overall, the graduation rates increased from 61% to 73%. And that's from when the program started to just before COVID. Measure H, this measure that's on the ballot now, we were talking about Measure N. Measure H will extend the parcel tax of $120 per year for 14 years, so through 2037. And in that parcel tax, there are some exemptions for seniors and low-income households. The measure requires an independent auditor to issue an annual report and audit. Another factoid, just in passing, that there are 2 other parcel taxes for Oakland schools that are currently in effect. Measure G for $195 a year per parcel, and G1, which is $120 per parcel, and those support other programs for the school district. I'm going to skip over who's in favor and who's support because we haven't been able to get access to that information, unfortunately. The registrar hasn't told us, And the city has told us what the arguments for and against are, but has not said who the people are who signed the ballot. So we'll have to wait till we get our sample ballots, and those should be coming any day now. So reasons to support Measure H. Measure N has been effective in improving academic metrics and providing career pathways, internship opportunities, and counseling that benefit high school students. Given Proposition 13, a parcel tax is one of very few ways to ensure consistent funding to this program, as OUSD and state funding will vary. Reasons to oppose: there are people who feel that future funding should come from the OUSD budget now that the program has proven its value. So if you vote in favor of Measure H, it means that it will extend the existing parcel tax of $120 per parcel for 14 years. And if you vote against it, it would mean that there would be no extension and that that particular parcel tax would end in 2025. Measure Q is the first of several that have been put on the ballot by City Council. And it talks about affordable housing authorization. And by way of explanation, in California, if a city wants to build an affordable housing project, city voters must approve that project. This is state law. And what Measure Q would do would be to authorize 13,000 affordable housing units in Oakland just by this one action, which would mean that for when future affordable housing projects are proposed, you wouldn't have to stop and take a vote at that point. Because you have already authorized the city to enter into projects to build 13,000 affordable housing units in Oakland. So this is why there are no fiscal effects for this particular measure, because you're not saying that there's going to be a particular project that's going to cost a certain amount of money. You're just authorizing the city in the future to build an additional 13,000 affordable housing units in Oakland. Reasons to support this: Measure Q would support Oakland's overall housing plans, as this authorization allows larger projects to move forward without unnecessary delays. A reason to oppose it: there at present are no formal opposition or arguments have been published as of yet.
Bonnie, I'm going to interrupt for a minute. It's hard for us to see your slides. We're seeing your speaker notes.
Oh dear, that's not so good.
Yeah, do you want to stop?
Let me go back and stop sharing this and see if I can set things up to share just the slides.
Yeah.
Okie doke. I think this is the one we want.
Yeah, yep, that's better. Thanks. Can you see your speaker notes still?
Well, that's what I need to try to find. So yes, I can. And you can see the full slide now?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So I've moved on to Measure R now, and there are a lot of them. If I'm going too fast, tell me just to slow down and I will do that. So the Oakland City Charter, this is a measure that would amend the city charter, and it would specifically amend the charter to in issues where to result in gender neutral language, because currently the charter uses gender specific words to refer to city workers and officials. And for example, the city charter uses the word firemen, and the city charter also uses male and female pronouns like he and she. And so Measure R would change the city charter by replacing these gender specific words with gender neutral words. So for example, the city charter would use the word firefighters instead of firemen. The city charter would also use gender neutral pronouns like they instead of he and she. And Measure R is not expected to have an effect on city income or spending. Reasons why you might want to support Measure R. City workers and officials have a variety of gender identities, and the city charter should use words that represent all of those identities. And in fact, the state of California has a policy to use gender neutral words in laws and official documents. A reason to oppose it? Oh, again, no formal opposition or arguments have been published yet. Any questions? And Helen, are you monitoring the chat at this juncture?
I am, thanks.
Okay.
Yep.
So Measure S. Currently, to vote in the Oakland School Board elections, Oakland residents must be US citizens and be at least 18 years old. Non-citizens cannot vote. Non-citizens include legal permanent residents, people with work visas, and the undocumented. Interestingly enough, there are over 13,000 non-citizens in the city of Oakland who send their children to Oakland schools. San Francisco has been allowing non-citizens to vote in school board elections since 2016, and I think it's true in other states also. But the law in San Francisco is currently being reviewed by the courts. Measure S would amend the city charter to allow the city council to pass a law to permit non-citizen residents to vote in Oakland school board elections if they are parents, guardians, or legal caregivers of eligible children. The city council would be the one who would set the qualifications and the criteria of eligibility for non-citizen voters. If this law passes, Oakland would incur an estimated $21,000 to $28,000 in additional costs to administer the elections. And in addition, Oakland and Alameda County would also incur unspecified costs for keeping track of additional voter data. Reasons why you might support Measure S. It will enable all parents and guardians of children in Oakland to influence school board policies, not just citizens. Parents and guardians of children have the most incentive to elect good school board leaders, and they should be allowed to do so. You will promote an educational policy that considers the needs of marginalized communities and encourages the participation in civic process. Reasons you might oppose this measure. As immigration laws are specific and strictly interpreted, non-citizens could risk significant unintended consequences. Implementation will be difficult and could be costly given the need to set up a separate voter registration system and to conduct effective public outreach to inform residents. Oakland should wait until the law is settled and avoid unnecessary legal challenges and expenses. So if you vote yes, you will be saying that eligible non-citizens can vote in school board elections. If you vote no, there would be no change to who can and cannot vote. Measure T. All businesses in Oakland pay a business tax. Currently, Oakland businesses are classified into many categories, such as grocers and hotels and motels, manufacturing, and so forth. And businesses within a certain category all pay the same yearly flat tax, regardless of their size. That is, the percentage of the revenue of the business is the same, no matter how big the business is. If you have a bigger business, you pay more because you're paying a percentage of more money, but it's flat. It's the same rate for businesses, whether they're big or little. The tax code for rental property and cannabis taxes was just updated in 2019. So Measure T doesn't apply to these businesses. Measure T would change the business tax to a progressive tax. That means that businesses pay higher rates when they earn more money. Excuse me. Oakland has nearly 60,000 small businesses and just over 50 large companies. If Measure T passes, about 6,000 small businesses would actually pay less tax. But companies with administrative headquarters in Oakland, companies that earn more than 20 million, could pay many times more than what they currently pay. back to this whole question of what a flat tax is. For example, a small manufacturing business and a large manufacturing business both pay at the same rate, or $1.20 per $1,000 earned. In a progressive tax, a small manufacturing business that earned $500,000 would have a tax rate of $1.20 per $1,000, while a large manufacturing business that earned 50 million would have a tax rate of 2.5 or $2.50 per $1,000. The fiscal effects. The business tax in 2021 generated approximately $104 million for Oakland's general fund, and the proposed measure could raise an additional $21 to $22 million. Reasons why you might support Measure T. Other cities like San Francisco, Richmond, and San Jose have progressive tax rates, so should Oakland. This measure reflects extensive input and compromise from the city council, labor, and business groups, and allows Oakland to raise much needed revenue. Apparently, up until before the election, there were at least 3 different groups of people who were going to propose changes to the business tax. And they decided, rather than competing with one another, they should get together and see if they could reach a compromise, and Measure T is the compromise. Reasons to oppose this proposition would be, or this measure would be, the tax hikes may cause businesses to leave Oakland or to avoid locating here. Businesses may instead choose cities with lower taxes like Berkeley and Pleasanton. Another reason would be that a tax rate increases should be introduced slowly and not all at once, to give time to study the impact and adjust tax increases only as needed. What your vote would mean: if you vote for Measure T, you would want to change the business tax structure and the rates. If you vote against, you don't want any change at this point. Measure U, an infrastructure bond. This is going to, because it's a bond measure, require 2/3 vote to pass it. Some background. In 2016, Measure KK approved bonds for $600 million for street paving, to repair street facilities, and to build affordable housing. That money has mostly been spent now, and more is needed, especially in the affordable housing bucket. Measure U would approve $850 million in total. If approved, Measure U would provide $350 million for the rehab or new construction of affordable housing, $290 million for street paving, pedestrian safety, and other transportation projects, and $210 million for city facilities like library, fire, and police, as well as parks. So, the fiscal effects. To repay the bonds, including interest, Oakland will increase property taxes at about $67 per $100,000 of assessed value. And assessed value is not the same as your market value of your house. For example, if your house is assessed at $500,000, you would pay an additional $335 per year in taxes to repay the bonds, including the interest on them. And Oakland recently adopted a policy to limit taxation for overall bond repayment to 0.22%. So the maximum a homeowner could pay for Oakland city bonds is $220 per $100,000 of assessed property value. And to implement this policy, the city intends to issue the proposed bonds as older bonds are retired or the tax base increases or grows. This measure would mandate an annual independent audit and oversight by the Affordable Housing and Infrastructure Bonds Public Oversight Committee. Reasons why you might support this Measure U. Measure U will provide funds to continue the work that was begun under Measure KK, especially for more affordable housing. and Oakland needs to continue to repair and upgrade its fire and police facilities, libraries, parks, recreation centers, and streets. Reasons to oppose the measure: standards for oversight are not as stringent and specific as they should be. Taxes are already high. Oakland should pay down existing bonds before issuing new ones. What your vote means: if you vote yes on Measure U, there will be additional funds to build more affordable housing, repave streets, and improve aging facilities. If you vote against it, no bonds for this purpose would be sold. Measure V, just cause for evictions. This is a new law, and to pass it, you would need 50% plus one. Over the years, Oakland voters have passed many renter protection measures. And just as background, over 60% of the occupied units, housing units in Oakland, are rentals. And as the average rent keeps increasing sharply every year, many of these renters would not be able to find affordable housing in Oakland if they are displaced. A tenant's refusal to sign a new lease with mostly the same terms as the old lease is no longer a just cause for eviction. The fiscal effect: owners of rental properties are assessed a $101 fee per unit, half of which they may pass on to the renters in an increase in rent. Because the measure would increase the rental units subject to the fee, the city is likely to receive additional revenues sufficient to offset any increased costs. Reasons that you might want to support this measure: Measure V will help reduce the risk of displacement for more tenants. And reducing this risk for students and school employees is especially important, and there are specific aspects to Measure V that do apply specifically to students and school employees. In order not to discourage new construction, Measure V exempts units, including accessory dwelling units that have been built in the last 10 years. Reasons that you might oppose Measure V: it may still discourage the construction of new housing, and without more new housing, rents for existing housing will continue to increase. Giving special tenant protections to school employees and families with children may discourage landlords from renting to them. This measure may also discourage landlords from allowing motorhomes on their land. So if you vote for Measure V, you're saying, yes, let's have more renter protection measures. If you vote no, you want no change to the renter protections. Measure W. Individuals and organizations who donate to political candidates can acquire significant influence because running for public office costs money. In Oakland, there's just a few donors that provide most of the money for campaigns. It's not a huge number in the community. Public campaign funding programs can reduce big donor influence. Oakland has a small campaign funding program that reimburses some expenses for city council candidates. Measure W would create a new campaign funding program. Through this program, registered voters and other eligible residents could receive 4 $25 vouchers before each election. They could donate this money to candidates of their choice running for mayor, city auditor, city attorney, council member, or school board director. Candidates who participate in this program would need to limit their total campaign spending and provide campaign spending reports. Measure W requires that the 3 highest contributors to a campaign be disclosed on all materials supporting or opposing Oakland candidates or measures. Measure W would lower the limits for donations to candidates from $900 to $600 for individuals making those donations, and businesses and It would lower the limit for donations to candidates from 900 to 600 for individuals, businesses, and other organizations. And it would lower the limits from $1,800 to $1,200 per donation from political committees. Measure W would also reduce political influence through restrictions on lobbying. For example, former city council members or other city officials would be prohibited from lobbying for 2 years rather than just 1 year after they leave government service. The fiscal effects of Measure W: Oakland would pay $700,000 in startup costs, and then $1.6 million every year for administrative costs for 4 staff members and non-staff costs, and then $4 million every 2 years for these vouchers that would be provided to the candidate campaigns.
Hey, Bonnie,
Yes.
Linda Spencer has a question.
Mhm.
Linda, you want to do that?
Yeah, do any other cities have similar laws as this that you guys are aware of?
I was just about to say that.
Oh, I beat you to it. Okay, thank you.
Now, this wasn't created out of full cloth. Actually, there's a similar program in Seattle that's worked very well to increase candidate diversity and has led to greater participation in elections from people across a range of races, ethnicities, ages, and income levels. And another reason to support is that Measure W will make elections more fair for candidates who don't have connections to large donors. Reasons that you would perhaps oppose Measure W: candidates who have connections to large donors may choose not to participate in the program, and so they may still have a big advantage in elections. Measure W will cost too much and is not an effective use of city funds, which should be spent on other needs. Measure X. Measure X would impose charter amendments and pass a new law, and requires a 50% plus 1 vote to pass. The Oakland City Council has 8 council members who are elected directly by the people of Oakland. The council sets goals and priorities for Oakland, approves the city budget, adopts laws, and appoints members to various boards and commissions. Currently, there are no term limits for city council members. They can stay in office for as long as they keep winning re-election. Measure X proposes to limit council members to 3 consecutive terms. However, they would be able to run again after sitting out 1 term. Council members can put measures on election ballots. Currently, measures may be placed on the ballot after only 1 public hearing. Measure X would require 2 hearings before a measure is placed on the ballot. Council members vote on city laws. Currently, when voting by council members results in a tie, the mayor casts the deciding vote. If a council member wants to prevent that tie, they can avoid casting their own vote, and this prevents the mayor from being able to cast the deciding vote. However, Measure X will count council members' abstentions or absences as no votes. Currently, the Public Ethics Commission sets the salaries of council members. With Measure X, the Public Ethics Commission will set council members' salaries every 2 years using the Consumer Price Index. Currently, council members set the salaries of the city auditor and city attorney. With Measure X, the Public Ethics Commission will set the city attorneys and city auditors' salaries based on salaries of similar positions. Currently, the city auditor and city attorney are allowed to support candidates and ballot measures with money, endorsements, and help with campaign activity. Measure X would prohibit that. Currently, the city auditor's office is not required to employ a specific number of staff members. Measure X will give the city auditor more responsibility and require that the city auditor have government expertise. The city auditor's office will need to employ at least 14 full-time staff members. Reasons to support the measure. This Measure X would address some of the problems with Oakland government operations. It may make the offices of city auditor and city attorney more effective, and it may attract and retain more qualified candidates. Reasons that you might oppose this measure. It's not a comprehensive reform, but a piecemeal approach to fix some issues. Bundling different reforms together in one measure does not give voters the option to vote for some reforms, but reject others. Term limits are not absolute or strict because council members can seek re-election after sitting out one term of office. Measure Y, a parcel tax requiring 50% plus one votes to pass. And this, I think, was put on by initiative. Yes. As an initiative, this parcel tax requires 50% plus one to pass. Oakland Zoo annual budget is about $24 million. Entry fees, food, souvenirs, and rides provide the majority of its operating revenues, which have been badly impacted by the COVID pandemic. The zoo receives about 8% of its budget from public funding from Oakland, Alameda County, and East Bay Regional Parks. Oakland Zoo has almost 1 million visitors every year, about 15% of which are from Oakland. Measure Y would be funded by a 20-year parcel tax starting in 2023. It would raise about $12 million in additional funding for the zoo's operations, staffing, maintenance, and capital improvements. The measure requires Oakland and other public funding to stay at the same level. In other words, the city of Oakland and the Alameda County and East Bay Regional Parks could not lower their contributions because Oakland had passed this measure. Okay, so just by, again, by way of background, the 8% of public funding is broken down. $171,000 comes from Oakland's general fund. A varying amount comes from Oakland's transit occupancy tax between $818,000 and $410,000 in recent years. And then $100,000 comes from East Bay Regional Park District, and about $1.2 million comes from Alameda County. So the visitors, 15% are from Oakland and about 65% of the visitors from Alameda County, including Oakland, and the other 10% are from elsewhere. The fiscal effects if Measure Y were to pass. Residential property owners would pay $68 annually, and owners of multi-unit residential parcels would pay $68 annually for each unit. Certain exemptions will be available for low-income households and seniors. Non-residential property owners would be taxed based on the size of their property. All assessments would be subject to annual cost of living adjustments. Measure Y requires an independent annual audit and an annual report from the Office of the City Auditor. Reasons to support Measure Y. The zoo needs funding to keep its budget stable and to expand operations. Parcel tax funding would allow the zoo to expand educational programs and offer free passes. These efforts would benefit Oakland schools, nonprofit organizations, low-income residents, and seniors. Reasons to oppose Measure Y. It doesn't have enough financial accountability because it does not specify how much tax revenue will be spent on each of the zoo's different needs. Measure Y does not require that specific benefits be provided to Oakland residents. This is not fair because only Oakland property owners would be paying the tax, and 85% of zoo visitors live outside of Oakland. What your vote would mean. A yes vote for this measure means that a new parcel tax would go into effect, which would result in more funding for the Oakland Zoo. And a no vote would mean that there would be no such parcel tax, no change to funding for the Oakland Zoo. Going to stop for a minute and take a breath. That's the end of the Oakland measures. And then there's one county measure. Any questions?
I don't see any, Bonnie.
Okay, let's go. Measure D, agriculture and open space lands. This requires 50% of the vote in Alameda County +1. By way of background, an original Measure D in 2000, or another Measure D in 2000, set ratios of agricultural buildings and horse arenas to land in unincorporated areas of Alameda County, so areas outside of the cities. A change requires a vote by the county. The effects of this measure would change the ratios for agricultural buildings and equestrian arenas relative to the land area to allow for expansion of those things. Those in support, it was placed on the ballot by the Board of Supervisors and in the process of deciding whether to place it on the ballot, they held 30 public meetings since December of 21. So that's a lot of meetings in 2022. The Greenbelt Alliance supports this, and Nate Miley's, a committee of Nate Miley's, Nate is one of the supervisors. At this point, there is no official funding committee that is opposing this measure. Reasons that you might vote to support it: it will allow more space for covered corrals at equestrian facilities, as well as performance areas. It will allow expanded storage areas, processing and retail facilities for wineries, olive presses, and so on that serve the public. Reasons that you might vote against it: Measure D would enable a handful of big wineries to triple in size while the smallest would not grow. It weakens Alameda County's environmental protections. So that's the end of my presentation on the local ballot measures. The League of Women Voters website has at your fingertips the ability to download a one-pager of a pro and con for each of the city measures, or to watch a video, a short video for most of the measures on the ballot. And this is the information that I gave you earlier about sources of additional information for the state propositions. So thank you for being a voter. Your one-stop voter resource is lwvoakland.org. We have a brand new website and it's very fancy, but the print is small. So when you go to it, you need some time to read the small print to decide where to find your pros and cons, and also links to candidate forums, by the way. And this would be the time to mention that tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, there is actually a forum for the 10 people who are running to become mayor of Oakland. It's going to be a virtual forum, and so you need to register for that. And if you want to register for it, you would go on the League of Women Voters of Oakland website and find that forum and register for it. You don't have to watch it at 6 o'clock tomorrow night. If you register for it, you will be sent an email with a link to the recording of the forum so that you could watch it later. Another source of information that I care a lot about is votersedge.org, which is an online voter information website that's sponsored by the League of Women Voters of California Education Fund. And on Voters Edge, you can find information about candidates, about measures, where your polling places are going to be. And since we're not voting in individual polling places, but rather voting centers, that information is available on Voters Edge also. Be on the lookout for your mail-in ballot. It should arrive around October 10th. And sometime early in the coming week, we should be getting our sample ballots from the Registrar of Voters of Alameda County. And we love new members in the League, so support democracy and join the League. And you can do that from the website, or if you would prefer, you can send a check and mail it to our new post office box. And that information is available on the website, but we do have membership brochures, and we'll have some at church in the coming weeks. So thank you for your interest. The last slide is just a wee bit of history about the League. If you'd like me to show it, I can do that, or we can let you go. We still have, what is it, 13 minutes? No, 12 minutes. No, I don't know. We still have a few minutes before 3:30, and we were scheduled to run till 3:30. So here's your history of the League. We were founded in 1920, and we should say that the people who founded it were all the men and women who had been working for women's suffrage for years before that. It was founded it is a nonprofit, and it is nonpartisan. We do not support or oppose candidates or political parties. And when you join the League of Women Voters of Oakland, you automatically become a member of the League of Women Voters of Oakland, the League of Women Voters of the Bay Area, which advocates and educates on regional issues, the League of Women Voters of California, which does its advocacy in Sacramento, and the League of Women Voters of the United States, which is the one that does the advocacy with Congress in Washington, D.C. Our mission is both education and advocacy, and that's been true from the very beginning. It was founded because of the realization that there would be this huge influx of people who had never voted before. And so the League was founded to help them understand the whole process. But from the beginning, the League has advocated in supporting and opposing various laws having to do with child labor and women's rights and the United Nations and good things like that. So that's the end of our presentation. Thank you for sticking with us.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions, comments people have? Bonnie, maybe you could stop sharing and then we can see people a little bit better.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah.
If we wanted to find out what the Oakland, for the advocacy wing of the League, which is not the purpose of today, but if we wanted to find out your position on a particular Oakland ballot measure, where would we find that?
So you would go to our website and look for the link to Vote with the League.
Okay.
Okay, and the State League also has some measures that they are opposing or supporting, and that would be available at lwvc.org. Okay, thanks for your question, Linda.
And we will have flyers at the at church and coming Sundays.
Yeah, during coffee hour, we'll have things, flyers and voter guides and all good things like that. Yeah, little bookmarks to remind you how to find Voter's Edge. Yeah. I hope we didn't leave too many people on the other platform.
I think
we'll have to be sure that something goes in contact saying that the thing was recorded. Oh,
I'll stop recording.
We should stop the recording.